Hollywood has always been built on illusion. On screen, we get sweeping romance, unbreakable friendships, and fiery passion. But behind the scenes? Well, that's where things get complicated. For nearly 40 years, one particular on-set feud has been whispered about and written about until it became Hollywood legend. It's the story of two titans clashing under the intense, boundary-pushing production of the film 912 Weeks. The stars, of course, were Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. The story we all think we know is one of pure animosity. We've been told Basinger loathed Rourke, that the experience was so harrowing it left her with emotional scars. The narrative paints a picture of two actors at war, with their real-life friction fueling that explosive on-screen chemistry. It's a dramatic story, it's a tantalizing story, and as it turns out, it's not the whole story. What if the legend we've all accepted is just that, a legend? What if the hatred was a myth, and the truth was something far more complex? Something that speaks not to a personal grudge, but to artistic dedication, intense psychological manipulation, and the incredible cost of creating an erotic masterpiece. Now, at 71, Kim Basinger is setting the record straight, and her version of events challenges everything we thought we knew. She is naming the source of her on-set anguish, but the answer is way more shocking than just hating the man standing across from her. This is the untold story of what really happened between Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. To really get the myth of the Basinger-Rourke feud, you have to go back to the mid-1980s. It was a decade of excess, big hair, big shoulders, and even bigger egos. Hollywood was cranking out blockbusters, and a new breed of star was taking over. Two of the brightest were, without a doubt, Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. Kim Basinger was the definition of an it girl. A former model from Georgia, she had this ethereal, classic beauty. But underneath that stunning surface was a vulnerability that Hollywood was just starting to notice. She'd already been a Bond girl in Never Say Never Again, and even snagged a Golden Globe nomination for The Natural. She was on the edge of superstardom, just looking for that one role to prove her dramatic chops. Mickey Rourke was the total opposite. He was the brooding bad boy. A former boxer with a chiseled face and a wild streak, he was pure masculine energy. He'd come out of the famous actor's studio, a student of method acting who brought a dangerous, unpredictable quality to every single role. Films like Diner and The Pope of Greenwich Village had already made him one of the most intense actors of his generation. He didn't just play a part, he became it, blurring the lines between himself and the character in a way that was thrilling and, frankly, a little unsettling. When the controversial project 912 Weeks started coming together, it was clear this wasn't going to be your typical Hollywood romance. Based on a 1978 memoir, the story explored a deeply obsessive and psychologically twisted affair, touching on themes of control and sadomasochism. It was a risky script that a lot of actresses passed on. It needed someone willing to be completely exposed, not just physically, but emotionally. The director, Adrian Lyne, who was known for his slick, provocative style in films like Flashdance, wasn't interested in faking it. He wanted raw, unfiltered emotion, and he thought he'd found the perfect pair. Casting Basinger and Rourke was a stroke of genius. It was the angel and the devil, the light and the shadow, her perceived innocence against his raw intensity. The public was instantly hooked. Here were two of the hottest stars of the era, teaming up for what promised to be the most explicit and emotionally raw movie of the decade. The press was buzzing before they even shot a single frame. Basinger's audition alone was a sign of things to come. It was reportedly a grueling experience that left her feeling humiliated. Lyne had her act out a scene where her character, Elizabeth, is forced to crawl on the floor, groveling for money in a demeaning game. She left the audition in tears, telling her agent to never mention the film again. But Lyne was persistent. He saw the exact vulnerability he needed for the character in her reaction. After he sent 24 roses, she finally gave in. But the whole thing was a dark preview of the psychological game she was about to enter. So you had two stars at the peak of their fame, a director ready to push them to their absolute limits, and a story about the darkest corners of romantic obsession. It was the perfect storm, a volatile mix of talent, ambition, and psychological warfare. The stage was set, not just for a groundbreaking film, but for a Hollywood legend that was meticulously, and you could say cruelly, manufactured. The set of 912 weeks wasn't a normal film set. It was a closed-off laboratory designed by director Adrian Lyne for a very specific and controversial experiment. He wanted to capture the real emotional breakdown of a woman, and he believed the only way to do that was to completely blur the lines between acting and reality for Kim Basinger. The shoot, which lasted 10 weeks in 1984, was designed to unfold just like the film's story, trapping Basinger in a state of growing psychological distress. From day one, Lyne's methods were manipulative. He made one key decision that would plant the seed for all the feud rumors. He told Basinger and Mickey Rourke they were forbidden from having any contact off camera. No talking, no rehearsing, no hanging out. He wanted their on-screen relationship to be their only relationship. In a 1986 interview with the New York Times, Lyne admitted his strategy was to create an atmosphere that would force Basinger to feel her character's emotions for real. He told Rolling Stone, "I didn't want there to be an easy intimacy between them. There had to be elements of fear and danger." Now, this wasn't just forced on Basinger. She actually embraced it as an artist. In a recent revealing interview with Variety, the 71-year-old Basinger clarified her role in all this. She explained that she was the one who asked Lyne to shoot the film in order, and that she also wanted to keep the character's journey authentic. "I wanted to meet Mickey Rourke in that grocery store," she said, referencing her character's first meeting with John. "I did not want to say hello to him before. I didn't want to talk to him on the set when I met him for the first time. It was on film." But what started as a mutual artistic choice quickly became a tool for psychological manipulation, used by both her director and her co-star. Lyne would constantly pull Rourke aside, whispering instructions to him and deliberately leaving Basinger in the dark. He wanted to engineer her reactions, to provoke genuine confusion, anger, and fear, and then catch it on camera. He famously called Basinger like a child, an innocent, who doesn't actually act, she reacts. It's a pretty demeaning thing to say, but it reveals his whole strategy. He wasn't directing an actress, he was provoking a subject, Mickey Rourke, a die-hard method actor, fully committed to this bizarre dynamic. He stayed in character as the manipulative and distant John Gray even when the cameras weren't rolling. As the film's plot got darker and John's behavior became crueler, so did Rourke's on-set attitude. In an older interview, Basinger described the unsettling shift. "We shot in sequence, and in the beginning, when the character was sweet, he was very sweet too. Later, when the movie started getting strange, he stayed in character." This constant pressure took a huge toll. Lyne and Rourke would torment her, ignoring her in discussions. In one instance Lyne admitted to, Rourke grabbed her arm and refused to let go just to break her down before a tough scene. The incident left her angry and crying, which, in Lyne's mind, made her performance marvelous. For Basinger, the line between performance and abuse had become terrifyingly thin. It wasn't that she personally hated Mickey Rourke, the man. She was being conditioned to fear and resent John Gray, the character he was playing 24/7. The set had become a prison of her character's emotions. She admitted years ago that the experience was deeply traumatic and that the emotional distress started messing with her personal life and her marriage at the time. She felt played, manipulated, and completely alone. In one moment of clarity during it all, she questioned Lyne's methods, asking, "I don't know why, if he wanted some emotion, he went to Mickey and not to me." It's a devastating question. The whole process was designed to disempower her, to make her feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, just like her character, Elizabeth. By the end of the shoot, Basinger was emotionally wrecked. She later said that once filming wrapped, she didn't want to see anyone from the set ever again. So, did Kim Basinger hate Mickey Rourke? The answer is so much more complicated than that. She hated the dynamic. She hated the manipulation. And, at times, she no doubt hated the person who was the instrument of her torment, a man who, thanks to the director, never let her see him as anything but the cruel character he was playing. The hatred the world saw wasn't a celebrity feud. It was a carefully constructed psychological state, born from a director's ruthless hunt for authenticity and an actress's commitment to her craft, even when it pushed her to the edge of her sanity. In Hollywood, what happens on a closed set rarely stays there. The intense environment of 9-1-2 weeks was a pressure cooker, and it was only a matter of time before stories started leaking. When they did, they weren't about a controversial directing style or deep method acting. Nope, they were packaged for the public in a much simpler, much juicier narrative. Kim Basinger and this channel is all about separating fact from fiction, and if you appreciate these deep dives into the real stories of Hollywood, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Now let's get back to the aftermath of one of Hollywood's most infamous productions. When 9-1-2 Weeks finally hit theaters in February 1986, the reaction was bizarrely split. In the United States, the film was a total box office bomb. The studio had heavily edited it to tone down the explicit content, and it just didn't land with American audiences or critics. But overseas, it was a whole other story. The unedited international version was a cultural phenomenon, a massive hit that raked in over $100 million worldwide and turned both its stars into global icons. The film America rejected, the rest of the world couldn't get enough of. For Kim Basinger, the film was a mixed blessing. It made her a major international star and a sex symbol, but the psychological damage from the production stuck with her long after they called cut. She had been pushed to her absolute limit, and the experience left her feeling drained. The success was great, but the process was scarring. She came out of 9-1-2 Weeks a stronger actress, but the legend of her being difficult or fragile started to grow, fed by the stories of her on-set ordeal. Mickey Rourke's career path was just as complicated. The film shot him to a new level of fame, cementing his image as Hollywood's ultimate dangerous leading man. The rumors about his on-set behavior only made that persona stronger. He was seen as intense and uncompromising, qualities that were celebrated at first, but later contributed to his reputation for being difficult to work with, a reputation that would haunt him for years. The method that made his performance so powerful became part of his public identity, for better or worse. For decades, the story of their feud lived on. It became a staple of actors who hated each other articles and celebrity trivia. It was just too good of a story to die. Every time in 9-1-2 Weeks came up, the supposed fight between its stars was mentioned like it was a historical fact. The narrative was so powerful that it colored how people saw their later careers. Anytime Basinger was described as sensitive, people would bring up her traumatic experience on 9-1-2 Weeks. When Rourke went through his own well-known struggles, his behavior on that set was often used as an early example of his difficult nature. The legend became a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, a lens through which their every move was seen. Interestingly, despite the endless rumors, the two did work together again. They both appeared in the 2012 film Black November, though not in the same scenes. It's a small sign that whatever happened on that set, it didn't create a lifelong vendetta. Still, the legend held on. It was a gripping story of art imitating life, of on-screen passion fueled by off-screen hate. The truth, a much messier story of directorial manipulation and artistic sacrifice, was buried under a myth that was simply more entertaining. It would take nearly 40 years and a candid moment from Kim Basinger herself to finally start tearing that legend down and reveal the more disturbing reality of what really happened during those 9.5 weeks. For almost 40 years, the story was set in stone. Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke's relationship on the set of 912 Weeks was one of Hollywood's all-time greatest feuds. The story was told and retold until it felt like fact. But legends, no matter how solid they seem, are still just stories. And now, the main character in that story is finally telling her side. In a candid and wide-ranging interview with Variety, Kim Basinger, at 71 years old, directly took on the decades of gossip. With a calm, measured tone, she tore down the myth that had defined her relationship with her co-star. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply finally setting the record straight. So who was the co-star she supposedly hated more than anyone? The answer, it turns out, is no one. The entire foundation of the legendary feud was a lie. When asked about the rumors, Basinger was crystal clear. "It had nothing to do with all the stuff you read on the internet about he and I hating each other," she stated. But it was the next words that stunned everyone who followed the legend. "I loved him," she said of Rourke. "He's a brilliant actor, too." And with just a few sentences, 40 years of tabloid headlines and sensationalism went up in smoke. The story was never about hate. It was about art. Basinger explained that the intense isolation on set was a choice she made to protect her performance. Her request to shoot the film chronologically was so that her first meeting with Rourke would be her character's first meeting, captured on film forever. "I did not want to say hello to him before. I didn't want to talk to him on the set," she clarified. This wasn't personal. It was professional. She was building a wall not between Kim and Mickey, but between her own reality and the fragile emotional state of her character, Elizabeth. She didn't deny how hard the shoot was. She described her relationship with director Adrian Lyne as love-hate, admitting he was a fearless director, but also acknowledging the immense pressure he created. But she shifted the blame away from a petty feud and pointed it squarely at the real source of the tension, the manipulative environment Lyne deliberately created to get raw reactions. The so-called hatred was a side effect of the psychological game being played, not a personal fight between the actors. The trauma she felt was real. The emotional toll was huge, but it was a result of the process, not the person. Yes, she was manipulated. Yes, she was pushed to her breaking point. But her recent statements completely reframe the story. She's no longer the victim of a cruel co-star. She's a dedicated artist who, along with her co-star, agreed to a director's extreme methods to make a great film. The feud was nothing more than gossip, a misreading of a radical artistic choice. The clickbaity title of this video, "At 71, Kim Basinger names the co-star she hated more than anyone," is itself a reflection of the very legend we're talking about. It plays on the myth we've been sold for decades. But the truth, straight from Basinger, is that there is no name to name. There's no villain. There is only a story of two actors who committed so completely to a demanding process that the world mistook their on-screen reality for their off-screen lives. By speaking out, Kim Basinger hasn't just killed an old rumor. She's reclaimed her own story. So the great Hollywood mystery is solved. The epic, decades-long feud between Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke never actually happened. The story of hatred that fascinated us for nearly 40 years was built on a complete misunderstanding of a radical commitment to method acting and a director's obsessive quest for realism. What we thought was a story about personal conflict was actually a story about artistic sacrifice. Kim Basinger's revelations paint a brand new picture, not of a fragile victim, but of a devoted professional who walked into a psychological pressure cooker on purpose to deliver an unforgettable performance. She didn't hate Mickey Rourke. She respected his talent and took part in a shared and, yes, traumatic artistic experiment. The real story of 912 Weeks isn't about its stars hating each other. It's about the ethically blurry lines of filmmaking itself. It brings up a huge question that's still relevant today. How far is too far for a director to push an actor for the sake of authenticity? Where do you draw the line between genius and manipulation, between creating art and causing trauma? The legend of the feud was simple and juicy. The truth, as it so often is far more complex and interesting. It challenges us to look past the tabloid headlines and appreciate the immense and often hidden cost of creating the movies that define a generation. What do you think? Does a director's quest for a raw performance justify manipulating actors? Or are there some lines that should never be crossed, no matter how great the final product is? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into one of Hollywood's most persistent legends. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with a fellow film fan. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for more untold stories from behind the silver screen. We'll see you in the next one.